an consulting firm that is in service to private club managers and private clubs. It's important to me that everyone have a good understanding of how one goes about developing a strategic plan in a private club. So with that said, I will say to you that I have the privilege of teaching the strategic planning segment in the BMI strategic leadership segment that's a part of your certification. Can't tell you how proud I am of you that you're making the effort to be informed, to be knowledgeable, to be well prepared for the job that you will step into. So from that standpoint, I'm delighted to have an opportunity to participate in this program. If we look today, you see here the topics that I hope to cover. And I want to talk about strategy in private clubs. I want us to be sure that you know what should be in a strategic plan. And by the way, to that end, for any of you who say, gosh, I sure would like to get my hands on just a sample strategic plan, just email me and I'll be happy to share one with you. It is a fictitious club. It is not a real club. We would not violate anyone's confidentiality by sharing that information, but it's kind of nice to see what the thing is supposed to look like when it's all finished up. So happy to share that with you. I also want to talk a little bit about how you go about making your plan relevant to your board, to your staff, to the membership at large. So let's jump in and try to cover the things that should be a part of your strategic planning, leadership, and implementation of that plan. First of all, you got to ask yourself, because you will be asked, why do we need a strategic plan, for God's sake? We're a country club. This is not General Electric or Ford Motor Company. The first of the points I always try to make, you see over on the right side of the screen, is from Professor Michael Porter, who is the renowned Harvard University expert on competitive strategy. And he calls out two primary reasons for strategy and strategic planning. First of all is market differentiation. And as all of you know, private clubs float in a sea of sameness. And unless the club intentionally sets itself apart, pretty soon every club starts looking the same. So market differentiation, very important. Second benefit, important advantage that comes out of having a strategic plan is that very point. We're in competitive markets, and creating competitive advantage for your club is a part of your responsibility. So I encourage you to think that way. So yeah, look at this and you say, so what goes into a strategic plan? Well, there's your table of contents right on the screen. Executive summary, purpose. And by the way, used to be we had mission and vision statements, and the academicians are telling us now that in terms of strategic planning, purpose statements have replaced mission and vision for a couple of reasons. The first of all is everyone can relate to purpose. Everyone knows what that's supposed to mean. And the second reason is because most people got mission and vision confused. Many people didn't know which was which. And as a result, it became a confusing process. So purpose statement. Next, you state the core values of the club. What do we stand for? Who are we? What does this club mean? And that means that it's okay to say we're an upper mid-market family club, if that's what you are, or we're a golf club and strictly a golf club, or we're a yacht club and strictly a yacht club. Whatever that may be, you want to identify what are our core values, what do we stand for, and in so doing, you're eliminating the things that you're not trying to be. And I think that that's a key for you. One of the most elemental parts of a strategic plan is a statement of goals and objectives. For any one of you, when you go into a new job and you're put into your desk, you're going to turn to your board chair, your board as a whole, and say, okay, so what do you want me to do? And they should be ready to produce for you the goals and objectives against which your work is going to be judged. So that becomes a very important component. Because clubs are made up of people and are reflective of the markets that you serve, it's essential that you have good market information. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The next factor is a strategic plan with no orientation to finance and financials is pie in the sky thinking. You have to tie your strategic plan back to the dollars and cents of what is it going to cost us to be the club we're trying to be. And then finally, you convert all of your conceptual strategy into action with an action plan. And I'll show you what the components are within an action plan as we dig into that. We believe at GGA that it's essential that you develop a strategic map. And you see an example here of how we like to go about it. You want to be sure that you're prepared for in-process communications. One of the most common criticisms we're hearing in most clubs is of boards, of management, is the lack of transparency. No one knows for sure what's going on. I hear that so often in focus groups that anymore, when people tell me we want more transparency, I will ask them, what is it you think you're not being told? And these are my words, not any one individual's, but the answer I hear most often is, well, I don't know, but there's just a bunch of stuff going on. And so it's important for you to keep in mind, people want to know what the strategic planning process is, and absent communication, it just sounds like a bunch of baloney. So having in-process communication is important. One of the things we do is record little 2-3 minute videos with updates from me or one of the executives on our team who's responsible to the club for getting that strategy done. That's a golden opportunity for the manager to be communicating in very short, concise terms. We're making nice progress. Here's the next step that's coming along. And we've now posted such and such on the club's website so you can see the work that's being done. You see that there's a summary of deliverables. What are we going to do? What's going to be available for all members to read? And you see the roster there. We also pay a lot of attention to member engagement. We believe that's critical. And so when you look at your strategic planning process, you have to be asking yourselves, what are going to be the checkpoints at which we enable members to be involved? How will they get a chance to make their inputs? Certainly focus groups, something all of us have seen. We have found that in addition to focus groups, one of the powerful tools after the focus groups, after the survey, to conduct listening sessions of 20 to 30 members at a time to tell them, these are the things we think we learned. These are the things we think we heard from you. Did we get that right? And it gives everyone another bite at the apple. It gives them another chance to tell you what they think. And then, of course, we always like to be able to present our findings to the membership as a whole so that they can all see that they're a part of this process. And then finally, you end up on the right-hand side of the screen with your strategic plan in place. And that becomes a real important characteristic. Everyone needs to understand that the reason we're doing all of this is so that we'll have a bona fide strategic plan at the end of the day. You see another example of the kinds of planning that we do. This is where you start to see getting down into the weeds with some of the details of what you're actually doing within each of those segments. So as you go along the way, you keep building more and more information into the strategic plan and what members can expect to receive. And then, of course, this is an example that is just fresh to this week of a project on which we have started to show in a Gantt chart format, what are we doing, when are we doing it, and what are the deadlines? It's really important to your members to see that you set a plan in action and you executed to what you said you would do. And so you see the dotted lines coming down vertically to show when is the focus group report going to be available for everyone to read? When is the survey draft going to be developed? When is the research report going to be developed? Right on across the page. And it's essential that you meet each of your own deadlines. When you do that, people automatically start feeling better about, wow, this is a very business-like approach. Gosh, our manager is really on top of his or her game. And look at the method that we're using for developing this. That process-driven approach will serve you well, and it will certainly fortify your own credibility within the club as an expert. So having a process map, using your map, and letting your map reinforce your capabilities and your reliability, very important for you to take away from this process. There are certain components that are must-haves. Used to be strategic plans looked a lot like a report that you got from your accountants. And nowadays they've become a lot more published, a lot more finished in their appearance. They certainly don't have to be the annual report from a major corporation, but you want your strategic plan to be something of which you can be proud, of which your members can be proud, and something that is clearly a professional report and presentation that's being done. What you want to include is that you understand your market in depth. And you're serving a number of different markets. The two categories of your market are your internal market, that's your existing members. So that's why you use qualitative analysis in the focus groups and quantitative analysis to measure how strongly people feel on certain topics and what the proportionality is of people's viewpoints. That's an essential element to having a good understanding of your internal market. There has been such change in our society, and even more so as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, that you need to refresh and update your external market knowledge. And knowing your external market is way beyond calling your fellow managers and asking, so what are you guys going to do with dues next year? Or how much have you raised your initiation fee? Knowing your external market is a matter of what's happening with employment in your market area, what's happening with housing, what's happening with education. Those are all factors that go into the decisions people make about buying a club membership. And by the way, on that point, 91% of home purchase decisions are made by a female. So when you think about that, where people buy their home ties directly, in most cases, to where they will belong at a private club. So it's important for you to understand most clubs have a neighborhood or a small circle around them that is their primary draw area. You want to understand your primary draw area inside and out. And you also want to turn your attention to the significance that comes from having a great relationship with the women who will be driving the future of your club. You also want to be sure that you have analyzed your asset roster, that you know the value of your assets and when they're going to have to be replaced and what the cost of replacement will be. You want to plan the financial future of the club. Most everyone has had experience with SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. We've added, SWOT has a tendency to be somewhat backward looking. So we've added a SOAR analysis, which is intended to go to strengths, opportunities, aspirations, what do you want to be, and results, strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. What do you want the outcomes to be of this strategic plan? In some cases where you have clubs that are still finding their way, we also like to add a VRIO analysis, which is what's the value, what's the rarity, what's the inimitable nature of this club that go along with opportunity, so that you have all the more understood the value proposition at your club. One of the most common post-pandemic questions we're hearing when it comes to strategy is, what's the value proposition? So you're raising my dues, you're raising the initiation fee, get it, understand it. Where's the value proposition? I have to pay more money, so how am I getting more value from my club? And you need to be prepared to address that value proposition through some of these analyses that we're describing. You should include an understanding of your club's governance model. Many of us have heard the famous quote from Peter Drucker that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I can tell you, in a private club, culture is the way you govern. Your club's culture is acted out in its governance. If your board meetings are slipshod, amateurish, foolish, that's the culture of your club. If your board meetings are businesslike, responsible, serious-minded, that's the culture of your club. And it's important for you as manager to understand and influence in the ways you can your club's culture. You want to understand your club's brand management and reach. How far out do people know about you? You want to understand what your brand is. Remember the famous quote attributed to Seth Godin, the marketer extraordinaire, who observes that your brand is in everything you do and fail to do. So it's more than just your logo. It's more than just your colors. It's how you treat the delivery man. It's how you treat your staff. It's how members of the community view your club. That's your brand. And you want to understand your brand and what its effective reach is, because the greater your reach, the greater number of people you have the opportunity to influence as possible members of your club. And then, as I said before, goals and objectives have to be included. You as manager need to know what things am I supposed to accomplish and what objectives do I need to achieve in order to accomplish those goals. Let's talk a little bit about making your plan relevant. And I emphasized and underlined the word relevant because just having a strategic plan is only a part of the journey. Seeing that it's relevant is a real key, and the relevance of your strategic plan usually falls on the shoulders of the club manager. So when you think about that, you want to be sure that your members understand why we need a strategic plan. What are we going to accomplish with their strategic plan? Why do we need to do this? Why are we going to all this trouble? You need to be prepared to speak with that clearly, succinctly, and with intent. You also want to be sure that your members are engaged. I gave you several examples earlier of how we like to engage your members and see that they're a part of things. I can tell you that when we have focus groups, a question I'm often asked by the club managers, so how many do you think we should have? Well, off the record, after 5 or 6 focus groups, we've pretty much heard everything we're going to hear. You know, a focus group is 6 to 8 people at a time for 60 to 75 minutes. So we've pretty much heard what we're going to hear. But if we have 3 days of focus groups and we've now had the chance to talk to 150 or 200 of your members, we have a lot more people out there who feel that they're a part of this strategic plan, that this plan reflects their opinions, their attitudes, their inputs. So engaging members is really an important thing to do. That's why we like the listening sessions, because we get bigger groups and we therefore can engage even more of your members. So the more members you have that are engaged, the more relevant the plan becomes to them. And then, of course, I've talked already about the importance of transparent deliverables, so I'm not going to belabor that, but I want to be sure that you are alert to that issue of being transparent and letting people see what you're doing. Over on the right side of the screen, I thought you might like to see some of the things that you'll have to wrestle with along the way. You'll have members of the club who want to hijack your strategic plan and want to put forward, we want more of this, or we want less of that, or we have too many members, or we don't have enough pickleballers, or whatever their particular agenda is. And one of the things that you'll have to reckon with as the manager is being sure that everyone is heard from and that the plan is executed as intended and not allow it to get hijacked. You'll also see your strategic planning committee and maybe some of your board members who grow weary. It takes a lot of time. It's a lot of work to have a great strategic plan. So you have to keep everyone going. You have to keep everyone engaged. One of the things we do is produce a lot of white papers that we like to share with boards and management along the way so that everyone can see these are the kinds of things that should be coming out of our strategic plan. And then, of course, the last piece of that is you want to be sure that you keep a steady pace, a steady drumbeat of meetings, of messaging, so that everyone remembers we're working on strategy. It's in process, we're doing it. And that's why it's so important for you to have that in-process communication. Things that start well have a tendency to end up well. And so I want to emphasize for this discussion several steps that you need to keep in mind for getting a good start. And first of all is you need to be sure that you can understand the differences in the segments of what go into the plan, because your members will ask you, well, what's the difference between a value and a goal? What's the difference between a goal and an objective? You need to know those things. You need to be able to explain that clearly. Any quick Google search will tell you, but the fact is you want to demonstrate on your feet to your members that you understand this, that you've got this, and that you're a reliable resource within the club. You also want to be sure that you understand your own reference points. And by that, I mean, how many rounds did we play last year of golf? How many court times did we issue? How many covers did we serve in the restaurant on average? You need to know all of your data points cold. You need to be able to speak as the authority at the club. You don't want to ever put yourself in a board meeting or beyond of having to say, I have to get back to you on that. I need to talk to our CFO. I need to talk to our golf director. You need to know your facts. So those points of reference become really important. When you're putting together the strategic planning team, you want to be sure that you organize a small group of planners. This is not one of those big committees that has 20 people on it. 5, 6, 7 people is a good size strategic planning committee. And I'll talk a little bit more about what kind of people you want on that planning committee in just a moment. But the other thing that is important for getting a good start is set deadlines. I know I've said that a couple of times already, but be sure that you have contemplated what the pace is going to be and what cadence you want as far as meetings, as far as communications, and therefore what deadlines. You as manager also want to call out, there's no point in us trying to have meetings the third week of July, because that's when we have our member guest, or that's when we have this, or that's when we have that. Be sure you plan around the red letter days in the club so you don't have your strategic planning committee distracted with other things when you would like to have them working with you on strategy. I mentioned a moment ago what kind of people you want on your strategic planning committee. You want people who are good thinkers. You want people who understand what they should be doing. A lot of clubs are populated with executives that have done strategic planning in corporations or elsewhere who come to the table with a certain amount of knowledge. Now, one of the danger points is oftentimes you'll have 2 or 3 experts in strategic planning who are all arguing at every meeting trying to prove who's the smartest person in the room. So you want to see that you've sorted through the personalities so you don't have to adjudicate arguments over who's smartest. You want to be sure that you end up with great strategic thinkers who are mutually respectful and can be productive. You want to be sure that you're open to multiple sources of information. You should be getting conflicting information. If you've gotten a lot of information, that's good. Some of it won't agree from one reference point to the next, and you have to sort through that. You know, private clubs are incredibly emotional places. You know, a relationship that you have in a private club is not transactional, it is emotional. That's why when I get a bad steak, that happened to me. I'm the one who got that bad steak. Do you understand that, how important that is? And it's emotional, it's not transactional. You also want to be sure that you can help everyone be looking beyond the reality of the day. What we're seeing right now is the most common mistake clubs are making and strategic planners in clubs are wrestling with is we've come through this coronavirus pandemic. Who would have ever dreamt a global health crisis would be so generous to private clubs? But it has been. So all of a sudden we went from many clubs desperately needing more members to now boards, club members saying, oh gosh, we're full. We don't need any more members. We have too many members already. And that day will pass. We'll cycle back through again, and we'll find that there will become stabilization again at whatever level it comes. And you need to be sure that everyone understands that there will be life at the club beyond today or this week. That means that you in particular and your strategic planning committee, to a broader sense, have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. You have to get comfortable with the idea that we have to think beyond today's circumstances. We have to be planning for the next downturn. You know, one of the things that we're already starting to see in our work is a cooling in demand for new club memberships. Now, there certainly is no fall off. There certainly is not a drop. Don't go away thinking that Henry sounded the signal for danger. Quite to the contrary, but we are seeing a cooling. And as a matter of fact, what we're going to see is as that cooling starts to become more pronounced, we'll see some clubs starting to need more members again. And that is that whole business of being uncomfortable, knowing that the sun doesn't shine on the same dog's back every day. And then, of course, if you're doing a great job as a strategic thinker, you're questioning everything today, tomorrow, yesterday. You're constantly trying to understand what's happening around us and how will that influence our club. By the way, I took these 5 points from Mike Brown, who's the Chief Catalyst Officer at the company called Brand Zooming. So attribution is due there. There are 2 things I want to be sure that you remember as you start to represent to your members what we're trying to do, what our strategic planning committee is trying to do. First of all, you want to be sure that you keep everyone strategy oriented. And that's hard. That's really hard. And I can tell you in our own company, when we work on the strategic plan for our firm, If we're not careful, before we know it, we've jumped from strategy to tactics. Well, we need to expand our reach. Oh, I know this person and I know that person. And before you know it, you're into tactics rather than strategy. And let's face it, most club managers are masterful tacticians. They're great at getting things done. And at the same time, the challenge to you as leader of this process is to keep this discussion strategy oriented. And you see some of the components that I've emphasized under being strategy oriented. By the way, before I leave that point about how masterful club managers are as tacticians, you know, club managers never stood taller than they did during that COVID pandemic. So many clubs were in trouble, desperate trouble, billions of dollars behind budget, until their club manager started finding solutions like takeout, like finding new alternatives for staffing. Club managers have really demonstrated tremendous value as a result of this pandemic, and you should be proud of that. The second component that I want to be sure you take away is that you have to be results driven. If you're going to have a strategic plan, if you're going to be strategic, you have to be thinking about results. You're not just making strategic decisions or developing strategic plans because you're part of some think tank. You've got to turn these ideas, this research, these great ideas, you've got to turn them into actions. You've got to turn them into results, and that becomes important. So as a result, you've got to be sure that you've aligned your purpose, the mission, vision, with the way you implement. You want to be sure that when anyone would challenge you as manager and say, why are you doing this? Well, this is consistent with our strategic plan. These are the steps we have to take tactically in order to achieve the goals and objectives that have been set for us. Or we're measuring these results because they align with the objectives that we were given by the board. So it's important that you keep everything connected to the results that drive the success of your strategic plan. Two things that a manager has to be paying attention to, back to Michael Porter: competitive advantage. Are you putting the club in a position that it can compete favorably in a highly competitive market? So that becomes one. And I always say that last bullet there, can you tell people what makes your club powerful? You should. You should be able to do so. That should be really easy for you. And by the way, it should be really easy for you to teach your staff what it is that makes our club powerful. I get a kick out of seeing so many young people who now want to talk about themselves in the context of their superpower. So as you think about that, be sure that you remember that you can understand competitive advantage and articulate it. The second factor that you need to manage as a part of this process is market differentiation. What makes us stand out? What makes our club different? That last question on the last bullet in the right side of the screen, can you tell how your club is different from others? Oh, ABC clubs, they're all fantastic. They're great clubs. Now, what makes us different is these factors. And that becomes a really important characteristic for you to understand. So as manager, you want to go into this understanding, I need to manage competitive advantage. I need to manage market differentiation, because when all the dust settles, when we have that terrific new plan, I've got to be able to take this plan and turn it into competitive advantage and market differentiation. If you think about how you go about putting this committee together that I was telling you, I thought you might be interested in some do's and don'ts around the idea of having a strategic planning committee. You know, very quickly, people like the idea that they're going to get a chance to get their hands on the controls of the club. So you want to be sure that your committee understands clearly what they're being called to do. You want to be sure that you have a regular schedule of meetings. And I think I say weekly versus monthly in the context of, it doesn't have to be a meeting every week, but let's just say every other week, every third week. But you want to have a cadence that's right for getting the work done. And that becomes a real important factor for you. You as manager have to coordinate tirelessly with your strategic planning chair. Be in touch with them regularly so that you know what they're thinking, they know what you're thinking. You're both seeing the same data points as they're coming in from your consultants or from your staff. You've got to be continually interfacing with your strategic planning chair. You also want to encourage your board chair to see that the strategic planning update is a part of every board agenda. You want to be sure that no one forgets we're working on strategy. We've got a strategic planning committee in the works. They're doing their job, and here's their update. And by the way, that update should be in writing as well as a verbal presentation. And then, of course, you want to be sure that you're coaching your strategic planning committee members on how they can be better strategic thinkers. Be encouraging them. Bring in speakers for them. Bring in experts that can help them think strategically. And under that, those are all do's. Under the heading of don'ts, don't let people start back channeling. Don't have a strategic planning committee and then afterwards so-and-so kind of hangs around and says, I didn't want to make a scene of it, but Henry's full of baloney. He doesn't know what he's talking about. There's no place for that. If someone needs to say something, it needs to be said in front of everyone on the committee. The committee has to work together, whether it's good news or bad news. You can't allow that back channeling. You also want to be sure that you have not organized your strategic planning committee around factions within the club. Well, we had to have some golf guys, but we also needed some pickleballers and some tennis players. Get the best thinkers. Don't worry about factions. Think about great results. And then the last is don't oversize your committee. And you remember I said 5 to 7 people is ample representation on your strategic planning committee. If you think about communications, I've touched on that now a couple times in this discussion because I think it's so important. You want to be sure that you are providing written communications on everything. You want everything to be in writing. I mentioned to you these little short videos. It's incredible how much members like to tap into a quick video update, more so than reading 500 to 1,000 words of carefully chosen reporting. That becomes an important factor. And then, of course, as I mentioned to you, you want to be sure you have a regular schedule of communication. That seems to be a common characteristic of the most effective strategic plans that we have been working on. And then I guess the last component that I'd want to be sure that we address is how you go about keeping strategy alive. And in so doing there, I show you a visual because I was working at a club up near Toronto a few years back. And the first focus group was a group of past presidents of the club. They knew where all the bones were buried. They'd been around for a while. The oldest gentleman at the table, before we really started the focus group, said, "Have you read our existing strategic plan?" And several of his successors looked at him like he was losing his marbles. And they said, "Larry, we don't have a strategic plan. That's what he's here for." To which Larry, sharp as a tack, said, "Sure we do. It's in the blue binder on the credenza behind the manager's desk. We did it on my watch. It's a heck of a plan." And no one knew about it. And of course, I was asking myself, oh my goodness, what do I do to keep that from happening again? And you see along the right side of the screen here, some of the things I felt I learned from that process. You want to be sure that after you start the strategic planning process, strategy is a Roman numeral on your board agenda, no different than roll call or approving minutes. That becomes a regular thing that you do, and either you or your strategic planning committee chair need to be prepared to report an update on the progress against the strategic plan. You want to also provide quarterly updates to your board and through the board to your membership as a whole. Our strategic plan calls for these actions this year. These are the things that my team and I are working on. You want to be sure that you keep an annual scorecard of your strategic progress. What were the primary goals and objectives that you were assigned, and how are we progressing against those goals and objectives? That should also come in the form of an annual strategic report from your strategic planning committee chair and the board saying, these are the goals we set out for ourselves, and this is the work that we have done on those. And the reporting has to be truthful, good, bad, or ugly. You want to be sure that members know we have a plan and we're executing it. And then, of course, the last component is be sure that you're having open meetings from time to time so that you can remind everyone what kind of strategic priorities you're working on. In wrapping up, I thought I'd share with you several examples of things that I think you want to use to keep your strategy alive. And while you're reviewing that, I'll share with you one of the best examples of goal setting I have ever seen is clear back to his speech before the Congress when John Kennedy was president in the 1960s, saying it's time for America to put a man on the moon, and we're going to do so in this decade and return him safely to Earth. That's goal setting, and that's darn straightforward, clear-cut goal setting. What are we going to do? What will be the outcome? What is the time limit on this? And Kennedy stated that. Now, the reason for the visual is because subsequently, unfortunately, President Kennedy wasn't around by 1969 to see a man walk on the moon. But in fact, in the in the early 1960s, he was at the Johnson Space Center at NASA and came around the corner, and here's this fellow mopping the floor. Kennedy was a little bit amused, how times have changed, that the president could be walking around the corner and bumping into a janitor, but he did. And the story goes that he approached the janitor and said, "I'm John Kennedy, what's your name?" And the janitor offered his name, and Kennedy said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Mr. Kennedy, I'm part of the team that's going to put a man on the moon." Don't you wish that person worked for you? Don't you wish everyone on your crew, on your staff, could as clearly identify with, I'm here because I'm serving these strategic goals and aims that have been set by our club's board, as opposed to, I'm just mopping the floor. You want to be sure that as leader, you're communicating strategic advantage, that you're focusing your board on strategy, that you're guiding your committees and your committee chairs. That's really important. As club manager, you want people to see that you have embraced this responsibility and you're taking it seriously. That you're teaching your management team, so all the way down the org chart to the janitor mopping the floor, everyone knows what you're trying to accomplish. And then, of course, you want to be sure you're telling your members about strategy, so that as you're pushing into the whole idea of we're going to have a strategic plan, be sure that people understand it's not just some document that's in a blue binder on the shelf. For God's sake, you and your staff work so hard to do a great job. You want to be sure that you deliver the results that were anticipated in a strategic plan. So with that said, I certainly am happy to try to answer any questions if I can, and I'm always available to you if you have questions or need a little bit more guidance. You see my contact coordinates there. I'm happy to try to pitch in whenever you need me.
Well, great. Thank you, Henry, for this very informative presentation on strategic planning. There's so much valuable information there. I just took a bunch of notes here, and some of the real great quotes I just jotted down here. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Clubs are emotional, not transactional. I think this is smart for all of us to realize, because the good times are not always going to keep on rolling. So look beyond the reality of today. And then I think it's a great reminder that be comfortable being uncomfortable. So a lot of good information there. And then I do have a few questions, and I think Beth might as well. What are the benefits of strategic planning? I know you got really technical, but how do you convince a board that strategic planning is a good idea?
There are several that I'd call out. First of all, having a strategic plan is a proactive step. It causes the club to not have to be reactive, that you and your strategic planners have already anticipated the assortment of circumstances that could arise. And so it puts you in a proactive mode. I'd also say that it helps you to be sure that you have planned for your resources, so that you know what we need, what we're going to need, when should it be there, so that you're not shooting from the hip. And again, back into that mode of being reactive. It gives you the opportunity also to have shared responsibility. You've identified this is no one person. This is not just the board. This is not just the board chair or the manager. There are shared responsibilities throughout the club. You also increase your operational efficiency. I gave a couple of examples where someone's going to challenge you. Why are we doing this? Where did this come from? You want to be able to say, we're doing this because this is part of our strategic plan, and it's helping to make us more efficient and more effective in maximizing the member experience. I guess I'd also say Having a strategic plan improves staff retention and staff satisfaction. Everyone likes to play on a winning team, and not many people like to play on a losing team. So being able to communicate to your staff, we have a plan and we're executing it. And part of my job as manager is to help everyone get that job done. So those are the ones that just pop into my head, Ken.
Okay, excellent. How long does it take to develop a master plan, and the cost, and is it important to engage a consultant?
First of all, it usually takes 4 to 6 months to develop a strategic plan. And I'm going to encourage every manager, if it takes longer, take longer. Don't rush this. This is not a race. Having a plan of this caliber means that you take the time to be thorough and diligent, really important. In nowadays, post-COVID, strategic planning cycles are costing somewhere between $70,000 and $85,000 for most of the firms that are providing consulting services. And by the way, it's my privilege to be here today to get to talk with everyone about strategic planning. But there are a number of companies that are highly effective at strategic planning. And so the question, should we engage a consultant? Yes, you should. And the reason that you should, as manager, you don't want to make yourself the duck that's going through the shooting gallery. You want to be the resource that's taking this information and putting it to work. And that means that you need a consultant or a third party that will be independent and objective in drawing conclusions and developing assessments, so that then when you are working with them, you've taken that information and you've gotten well-researched, well-informed guidance so that you can deliver the kind of results that are being anticipated. That's a real key for you. So take time, set aside the money in your budget to be sure that you are able to do all the things you need to do. This is not a place to cut corners. And then that last piece of the puzzle is let a consultant help guide you and choose one that is a good fit for you and your club.
Well, that's excellent. And we do appreciate your involvement. And I know that you've supported the Florida chapter for many years in engaging and creating our strategic plan. And we really appreciate that. Beth, do you have questions?
How often, Henry, should a club create a strategic plan, and how long should that strategic plan be for? Is this a 2 to 3? Is this a 3 to 5? And what are the steps in between to make sure that you're on that plan? We didn't really go into that today, but I think it's important for people to know that you're not planning for a year, that you're planning, and it has to be followed, and it has to be a constant in your mind that you're sticking to.
And I'll tell you, we plan on a 5-year cycle. So think in terms of a strategic plan that has a 5-year useful life. Our experience is that by the end of year 3, most of our clients have ticked off the boxes and have gone well down the line of accomplishing all the goals and objectives that they set for themselves. And it's time for a refresh. And at the same time, one of the things that I like to do is return to our client clubs each year and execute an annual strategic review. I would call it like an annual checkup when you go in to see your doctor, but I'm certainly no doctor. But to have that annual checkup and just say, how are we doing? And of course, think about if we had had strategic plans that were put into action in calendar year 2019, how everything changed by the same time of the year in 2020. So it's important to keep the strategy and the strategic plan fresh. And if events have conspired to making your plan not fresh, then you want to call on your consultants, and everyone needs to put a shoulder to the wheel so that you can refresh it and keep it current. But plan on a 5-year useful life and expect by the end of year 3, you're starting to look towards the next round of refreshing your plan.
Any other questions, Beth?
I think that's it. I just want to personally thank Ken and Henry for being such a big part of this competency in our certificate program. And Henry, you've always been such a great asset and team member for the Florida chapter. And we can't thank you enough for all of the support you've shown us always. And We look forward to working with you again on our strategic plan for the chapter and seeing you again soon. And thank you, Ken, for your thoughts on putting this competency together and reaching out to Henry to have him participate with us. So thank you.
Thanks again, Henry, for presenting in our certificate program and helping us all become better leaders. And also thanks to Beth of the Florida chapter for facilitating this program. Thank you, everyone.
Proud to be a part of it. Thank you.